The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Get the OSG Sports app today.
What makes college football special? It's the rivalries and trophy games. From the Dakota Marker to the Red Beans and Rice Bowl. It's college football's rivalries and trophy games. Here's your host, Anthony Goldman, John Nelson, and John Wilkerson.
Tommy Palmer, thanks. We are glad you're listening to our podcast on Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, or on our OSG Sports app on iPhone and Android. This week, either Duke or North Carolina will ring the victory bell and paint it their shade of blue. Luke DeCock, columnist for the Raleigh News and Observer, will add his unique take to the Battle of the Blues on the gridiron. And Dave Harding, football analyst for the Blue Devil Sports Network from Learfield IMG, adds his take as well. We'll also talk about Notre Dame and Michigan as they meet in the Big House. Anthony Goldman will join me for that one, and it's always a fun one. In Division II, West Texas A&M and Eastern New Mexico play for the wagon wheel. John Nelson has Lucas Kinsey, radio voice for the West Texas A&M Buffaloes. So let's begin with the biggest game in college football this week, and it will take place in Brookings, South Dakota. The top-ranked team in FCS, North Dakota State, takes on third-ranked South Dakota State. And oh, by the way, the Dakota Marker is on the line. It also caught the attention of College Game Day. That roadshow will be on the South Dakota State campus this Saturday. Later, John Nelson has the voice of the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, Tyler Merriam. And Jeff Culhane, the voice of the North Dakota State Bison, joins us from the Bison Radio Network. And Jeff, it's 1 versus 3. Possession of the Dakota Marker is at stake. The winner stays undefeated in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And oh, by the way, ESPN's College Game Day is going to be there. So I guess we can say there's going to be a lot of hype for this game.
Yeah, John, it's kind of, it might be a big game, right? With all those things surrounding it. Yeah.
Just slightly
great
big.
To be back. Yeah, great to be back on with you again. And no, this is about as big as you can get in FCS college football. I mean, to have a rivalry game and to have two programs that know each other so well with a trophy on the line, with the most important part about this that is getting the least conversation is the fact that the winner of this game really does a great job of setting themselves up for a top 2 seed in the bracket, which means home field advantage all the way through until the national championship. That's why this game is most important to me. But, for everybody else, for fans and some talking heads out there, everything around it is also extremely important with College Game Day, the rivalry trophy, etc. So should be a very fun afternoon Saturday in Brookings, South Dakota.
Well, let's talk about the prize that's at stake, one of many prizes, I guess, and that is the Dakota Marker. And tell our listeners the significance of that of the Dakota Marker.
So, there's kind of layers to this, honestly. For those people that don't know, North Dakota State and South Dakota State, they transitioned from Division II to Division I together at the same time, and did so amongst a lot of scrutiny from their in-state rivals, from their own fans as well, and people around both of the Dakotas saying that they were crazy for making the move to Division I. This trophy was initially introduced, I think, to give both NDSU and SDSU a form of purpose on the football side, especially during the transition years from 2004 through 2009. And it was proposed by a student organization in Fargo, the NDSU chapter of the Blue Key National Honor Society, and co-sponsored by the SDSU Student Association. And there was a ceremony near the North Dakota and South Dakota border, just outside of Hankinson, North Dakota. The trophy is a 75-pound model replica of the original quartzite monuments that are 7 feet long and 10 inches square, and they're placed at half-mile intervals along the border of North Dakota and South Dakota, and they are still there, John, right along the border here on the prairie in the Dakotas, and they were placed there in the summers of 1891 and 1892. So, it's a rock-like looking trophy, 75 pounds in weight, and initially was created to create, a fun purpose for both of these universities going to Division I together, and it has certainly blossomed into something so much more 15 years later.
I got a picture of it on my computer, and my initial thought is it kind of looks like a pylon, a very heavy one at that.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Yeah, it sort of does. It's a little bit bigger than a pylon, obviously, but, it has that type of look to it as far as its shape is concerned, and one of the fun traditions is seeing the winner sprint across the field or back towards their sideline to hoist the rock, as it's called here amongst the two teams, and celebrate either on their home field or on their opponent's field as well. So, and as the rivalry has grown, North Dakota State and South Dakota State were not rivals in Division II. It was NDSU and UND in Division II, and SDSU and the University of South Dakota in Division II. But because of how I think both programs have elevated their caliber of play to the highest level in the FCS, and South Dakota State in the last few years has won a couple of games in the regular season in 2016 and 2017, you get more of a rivalry factor. And don't get it twisted. There have been some moments in these games where some bad blood has taken place, some chippiness here and there, and I think you mix all that together and you've got that type of a feel.
Now, how much of the trophy is valued by North Dakota State? How much of it is valued to retain possession of the Dakota Marker with all the hype going on for this week's game?
Well, I think there's a high value on it, but I would imagine, John, that what's being talked about is, one, within NDSU's walls, they look at every game and try and keep them all the same, whether that is cliche or whatever. That's just how they view it. And so, I think that with this game, yes, I think the marker certainly provides a little extra energy to it. But I go back to the fact that, to me, the most important thing in this game is the winner is really setting themselves up well in the playoffs. Neither one of these teams wants to return to the other's home field in December and play in the playoffs in a semifinal round game. So that, to me, for this game, is the most important factor. Is the winner is probably a top 2 seed. The loser, more often than not, is going to have to go on the road if they want to find themselves in Frisco, Texas for the national championship.
We're talking to Jeff Culhane, the voice of the North Dakota State Bison, as we discuss the rivalry with South Dakota State and the Dakota Marker. And Jeff, the Bison have one of the best defenses in the FCS, number 2 in the nation in total defense at that level. What has impressed you this year about that Bison defense?
Well, I think it's some of the young faces, John, that have emerged and filled in some of the roles left by the veterans. I think a guy like Jackson Hankey, who is a sophomore from small-town North Dakota playing middle linebacker, is now the leading tackler for this defense. It's the next man up mentality. And again, another cliche, but it's what NDSU has done here. And to see somebody like Jackson Hankey emerge from small Park River, North Dakota, to see a guy like a Matt Siegler at defensive tackle, a walk-on from small-town Underwood, Minnesota, and Michael Tutsi, a true sophomore who was a backup and a special teams guy last year. He is now the second leading tackler on the team and leads the team with 4 interceptions, replacing the All-American Robbie Grimsley. So it's the next man up mentality. It's how these guys are just, for whatever reason, it's plug and play. And I think that's the culture here. I think it goes to show you how great the coaching is in all 3 phases with this staff under first-year head coach Matt Entz. And I think that's the most impressive thing to me is how some of these newcomers have stepped up and been just as good, if not better.
I watched last week's game against Missouri State, and I was really impressed with the hard hat mentality of the Bison offense. They just grind you down, and I appreciate those type of offenses, especially with an offensive line that can pass protect and blow people off to give your running backs a shot to open holes and give them the upper running lanes for them to run through. I was just very impressed with their blue collar mentality.
Well, your view there is spot on. And the offensive line unit is nicknamed the Rams here at North Dakota State. And I'll tell you, regardless of whatever off-season questions you may have about personnel with the Bison in different years or in different off-seasons, one position group is always going to be just fine, and that's the offensive line and the Rams. Regardless of who the position coach is, it's just been a tradition at NDSU for the longest of times, going back to the Division II days, and now currently in this great run this decade. Another form of plug and play. The coaches know what type of player they want there. Jim Kramer, the head of our strength staff at NDSU, does an unbelievable job developing these guys physically, and then the coaching staff prepares them the right way mentally as well. And a lot of it's small-town North Dakota kids that grow up wanting to be a Bison. And you've got a guy like Cordell Volston at right tackle from Balfour, North Dakota. A guy like Carson Schuning just south of the Canadian border who grew up on a farm in a town called Raleigh, North Dakota. Dylan Radon, that left tackle from small-town Minnesota. In Becker, Minnesota. It's just a mentality. It's an identity, and the offensive line is always going to be a group that is a huge strength for this football program.
Now, Jeff, I know you're in deep preparation right now, getting set for your radio broadcast. As you are studying, what are some keys to this game for the North Dakota State perspective?
Well, in the series with SDSU, I'll tell you one thing that the Bison have done really, really well is they have been absolutely outstanding in time of possession and also on third down in this series against South Dakota State. And over the last 12 games, the Bison have been 50% or better on third down versus SDSU 9 times. And since 2013, John, NDSU is 11 for 21 on 3rd and 10 or more versus the Jackrabbits. Those are amazing numbers. So third down conversions have been big, and then running the football is always important. In the 15 Dakota Marker games in the Division I era, when NDSU was rushed for 170 yards or more, the Bison are 9-0. When they have ran for 170 or less, they are 1-6. So those are a couple of stats that have trended towards why this game has turned out the way it has. But I think a lot of it is going to be on the young quarterbacks. Trey Lance for NDSU is a surefire lock to win the Jerry Rice Award as the best freshman player in the country in FCS. And there are some people that are talking about him as the best offensive player in the country as a redshirt freshman for the Walter Payton Award. He is efficient. He takes care of the football. 15 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, 7 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's the leading rusher for NDSU. He has just been an electrifying player for the Bison. On the other side is another redshirt freshman from Chicago, and Jabari Gibbs. He backed up Taron Christian the last couple of years, or the last year, I should say, for SDSU. Gibbs has suffered some injuries early on and a broken finger after the first game at Minnesota. Missed a couple of games. He's thrown 10 touchdowns and 4 picks and also ran for 4 more. And is coming off his best passing game of the season. Which one of those 2 young players will value the football more against 2 elite-level defenses that have taken advantage of mistakes, I should say, and made them into opportunities? The quarterback play with 2 redshirt freshmen are going to be something to follow.
So, Jeff, where can people listen to the game? Promote what you guys are doing.
Yeah, appreciate that, John. Folks, you can download the Bison 1660 app. It is free to download. and listen to our broadcast of the Dakota Marker game Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m. Central Time, sold-out crowd at DeCock Stadium in Brookings, South Dakota, with College Game Day in tow. It should be just an electric atmosphere.
You and your crew are one of the better listens in college football. So I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, John.
I'm looking forward to listening to this game.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet, Jeff, and I appreciate you joining the show. And now I toss it to my colleague, John Nelson.
Thanks, Wilkie. Time to go to the other half of the equation, and friend of the network / friend of the show is a very, very busy man this week. Tyler Merriam, South Dakota State. Game day's coming, brother.
Game day is coming. Game day's here. It is here in full force. I mean, we haven't gotten to the show yet, but it's coming, and it's been a lot of fun to be a part of. I'm excited about it, but as you made mention, it has caused those of us outside of the football program some stress. I don't know how much the team has dealt with it, but we certainly have been in the midst of it here from an administration side of things.
So when did you guys get the call?
Well, we found out it was late Saturday night, almost midnight into Sunday morning. They were considering Brookings as an option, and we had been led to believe in the past we'd have a little more lead time than it was even an option. So we literally found out it was a possibility. They had a few requests that Jason Hove, our Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Information, replied to and looped a few of us in on. And then a few hours later, they made the phone call to Jason. I think Jason said he was sitting in church and his phone vibrated and he knew enough to step out and thought God would understand and took the call. And Drew Gallagher, who's the coordinating producer, said, hey, we're coming. And that began what has been a crazy few days, a lot of meetings, and I play a small role in it. But our facilities people have been unbelievable. Jeff Holm, Christy Williams on the athletic side of it, some folks over from the university perspective. A lot of meetings, a lot of planning. The community's rallied around this, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
All right. So, do you know the layout? What part of Brookings is being commandeered by ESPN for this? Because when they've gone to Fargo in the past, it's literally been the downtown strip. They shut downtown down. They put up barricades, and they're right in the heart of things. What's the plan for Brookings?
So the plan is we have an area a couple of blocks south and west of the stadium where our campanile, and that is a big deal for SDSU. In fact, for a long time, the SDSU logo involved the Coughlin campanile. And that campanile is 160-some steps to the top of it. It's sort of a beacon on the Jackrabbit campus here, and that sits on the southwest edge of the campus. And so they will be on this huge area, we call it the campus green, which is just north of that, and they'll be able to shoot back towards the campanile. So it will be prominent in the shot. LSU has something a little similar to it. When they've gone there in the past, they've used it sort of as the crown jewel in the background. It'll be similar to that. It's a wide open space with a lot of walkways because students use that to go back and forth from the west side of campus over to the east side. So from a logistics standpoint for ESPN, it made a lot of sense for them. We, of course, liked it because of the space and also because of the fact that we can show off the campanile. That's what we pushed for. They came and looked at it. They agreed with us, got all the I's dotted and T's crossed, and here we are having it on the campus green.
How big a freaking deal is this, and how freaking cool is it?
That's very cool. It's very cool. Selfishly, I can say it's a very big deal. As to the exact parameter of it, let's be honest, we don't know. We've never had this. The 2 times it was in Fargo, they say the first time around they probably had around 4,500 people. The next time around it was almost 10, according to their reports from the Fargo police staff and what they dealt with. And we're planning between the football game, which is sold out, and this, that we'll have somewhere between 25 to 30,000 people on campus. But we don't know for sure. I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of this that we just don't know the specifics. We don't know the exact parameters because we've never dealt with it before. So we're excited. We're planning for a huge event. We know there'll be a lot of people here, and as opposed to Tuesday and Wednesday of this week when weather was less than advantageous, it's looking to be very, very nice.
And there's also Dakota Marker in play.
The Dakota Marker is certainly in play. It is a huge rivalry here in the FCS, and we're excited about it. You go back to the regular season meetings between SDSU and NDSU, and you've got a classic in Fargo 3 years ago that SDSU won in the final seconds 2 years ago. It was a tremendous football game in Brookings. The Jacks won, and last year was a back-and-forth game that NDSU won with a score in the fourth quarter. So the regular season meetings the last few years have been tremendous games between two highly ranked football teams at the time, and so tremendous excitement for it. And that marker is something special. We can get into the particulars of it if you want, but
Go for it.
It's a very unique trophy. It is a mock of the actual Dakota markers that line the border between North and South Dakota, and they're quartzite monuments. They are huge. They're about 6 feet tall. We do not have one that tall, but it is over 70 pounds, the version that we have. And I'll tell you what, I've carried it around a time or two to move it for some production. I don't know how these guys at the end of a football game chug it all around the field, because it is heavy, and there's a base that's just as heavy on it. So it's not easy to move around. It's not something that somebody will walk by and just grab off the shelf and run away with. I mean, if somebody's got it, you're going to know they've got it. It is a special trophy, and part of that's because of the regional aspect of it, and a lot of it's because you got two of the better teams in the FCS.
So basically, you're saying you do 3 sets of 12 with the Dakota marker, and your work is done for a couple of days.
Yes. It's taking a breath. I'm even thinking about it now. But no, I tell you, it is a mammoth piece to move around. But it's a really cool trophy. Again, you try to be unique. It's not just a piece of gold or something like that. It certainly is the perfect embodiment, and this came up 15 years ago when both SDSU and NDSU were just starting the move from D2 to D1, and who knew how things would move over that time span.
Tyler Merriam, the play-by-play voice of South Dakota State, hanging out with us here on the OSG on CFB Trophy Games and Rivalries. And this is also something where you have two highly ranked teams in FCS, so it's almost this harmonic convergence of events and rankings and trophies and rivalries all wrapped up into this one little ball of amazingness, I guess, for this weekend.
One little ball of amazingness. I like how you worded that. Yeah, it's something else. And you know, for North Dakota State, the last time the Bison lost was 2 years ago in Brookings to SDSU. The Jacks lost in Fargo in the playoffs, and the only team that played NDSU close a year ago was SDSU. So there's a lot of reasons why these two programs have been linked, and I think in some respects, you know, you want to be the best, and certainly John Stiglmeyer and the Jackrabbit program does, and yet when you look at how everything's played out, really the only things SDSU hasn't accomplished is because of the rival to the north, and you know, we're two of the top programs in the country playing. Like you said, this convergence, you're going to have a sellout crowd of over 19,000 people. You're going to have game day and all the festivities that go with that. It was already a big game to begin with, and then you lump this on top of it, and it's just that much more. And I know the folks in Fargo are excited. We're excited for the game, for game day. It should be just something else.
So for Coach Stig to get the Duke on the weekend, what has to happen, you think?
Well, I've talked to a lot of people up in Fargo and around here. It's tough to get a feel on this game other than we all agree we think it'll be a good game. You've got two redshirt freshman quarterbacks who will start. Trey Lance has never played a down against South Dakota State. Jabari Gibbs has never played a down against North Dakota State. And you can say what you want. The two quarterbacks always have a lot of say in the football game, and if one of them plays really, really well or doesn't, that's going to be a big factor. In these games, we've seen it time and again. SDSU was excellent in winning the turnover battle in the two games it's won recently in both 2016 and 17. So if either team has issues taking care of the football, that's going to be a huge issue. I think both teams are very good defensively. This has the potential to be the best Jack in a long time. NDSU's defense, Code Green as they call it, time and again, they just, they never rebuild. They just reload, it seems like, and they're excellent too. So if one of those guys makes a mistake, I think it's a mistake that's going to win this game, whether it's forcing that mistake or having it handed to you, because I really feel like it's going to be a tight, well-played game. We're going to look back and say, man, that missed field goal in the second quarter, or man, that fumble in the third was what decided a close football.
Now, for you as the voice of all of this and everything else that's been heaped onto your plate this week with this harmonic convergence and ball of amazingness that has happened.
Trademark that.
Yeah, really? Well, I'll tell you what, if you put it on a T-shirt, I'll buy the T-shirt. I just need to cut.
Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me.
Hey,
Don't tempt me.
Dude,
Go ahead.
It's all good, but now when it's got to be one of those good challenges that you have as someone who has as many hats as you do with all of this stuff that's been going on. I know that you're behind in your prep work as you and I are talking, but it's a fun being behind in your plan.
Oh, it's awesome, and I've said this to a few different people. You'd much rather be working in this scenario than be working with a 3-7 football team that has a bunch of apathy towards it. So there's no doubt this is awesome. It's a lot of fun. Is there some stress involved? Absolutely, but that comes with it. Some of us that work in sports have unique jobs, and our jobs aren't 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. It's a constant thing, and sometimes the mornings start a little later, and sometimes the nights end a lot later, and you work with it. So it's a lot of fun, and we joke about having extra on our plate. And yeah, there's been more meetings for a lot of people, and as I mentioned, I'm very low on that list. There's a ton of people who have had to put a lot more time and effort into this. But it's so exciting as an SDSU alum, as a South Dakotan born and bred, to be a part of this, to have a small role in everything really is exciting, and it's something that 5-10 years from now you're going to look back and be very proud of to have been associated with. So I'm very excited about it, and in the end, as you're pointing out, we're trying to push all these things out. We're trying to generate all this content and make sure that ESPN has what it needs. But in the end, we're trying to also make sure we've got all of our ducks in a row for a 2 o'clock football game on Saturday afternoon, because that's what all this leads up to.
Okay, now before we go, since you're an alum, and this is the real serious question that we're dealing with now. When it comes to tailgating, what is tailgating like, and is there a go-to food or just what is the most common thing that you notice when it comes to tailgating? Because I have to ask the food question.
Sure. And, I think, we don't get too exotic in South Dakota when it comes to tailgating. One thing that does come up sometimes is chislic, which is a South Dakota delicacy. It's essentially cubed pieces of meat, and they can be deer or they can be, varieties of chislic. That's a big deal in South Dakota. You'll see that mixed in. But you see a lot of the hot dogs, the brats, the chickens. We typically have a couple of folks on the north side in our big tailgate lot who once or twice a year will bring in a pig and roast it. And that's obviously a long process, day and a half in advance, and they're out there getting everything ready. But, and not to sometimes you go down south, you really get exotic, and we see some of it when we make trips to a Missouri or an Indiana, into those states to play games. We're a little more just stable. We know what we do well. We've got the chicken wings, we've got the hot dogs, we've got the brats, and mix in maybe some pork or things like that. And like I mentioned, the chislic is certainly a go-to here in South Dakota as well.
Okay, so then when I go to the concession stand, what's the go-to?
In the concession stand?
Yeah. When I'm in the building after having tailgated early, and I go into the concession stand, what's my go-to?
Sure. Well, I have to be honest. I get, being in the media, I don't get to go very often to the concession stand, so I'm a little out of the loop on that. Other than I know that everything there is good from what my wife and son tell me, so you can't go wrong. But the handful of times I've done there, I tell you what, Aramark makes a darn fine hot dog, and it's simple, it's to the point. But sometimes, you don't need luxury. You just need that solid nutritional meal that the nitrates inside of a hot dog can provide.
I'm down with that, and especially if you get the right mustard on a cold day.
There you go.
You get the right mustard.
Throw in some ketchup, some relish. You got all the condiments there for what you do or don't like. It's a bevy of options for you.
All right, Tyler, blatant promo time. Hit me.
South Dakota State University, land-grant institution, the creators of Cookies and Cream Ice Cream with a dairy bar on campus, which will likely make an appearance on ESPN College Game Day. In addition to that, we here in beautiful Brookings are the originator and the epicenter of Daktronics, the world's leading scoreboard manufacturer, which was created by a couple of SDSU professors, alums, and engineering folk who were trying to find a way to keep the students active and involved, and I think they've done that. We've got 3M here in town. Their base is here as well. So we've got a lot of solid business infrastructure here, but we've got 12,000 students and a great football team, one of the best in the FCS, a great game day atmosphere, and everybody's excited to show it off in full force in front of millions on national television on ESPN College Game Day.
And for those that want to keep an ear and an eye on you and the Jacks all season long, how do they do it?
They can go to GoJacks.com, our official website of all 19 SDSU varsity sports, particularly Jackrabbit football. And our radio coverage is always available through that. The TuneIn app has it as well. We also have a Jackrabbit app for those of you that can't get enough of the yellow and blue. And our radio coverage will start an hour before kickoff, as it does every time. So 1 o'clock Central Time on Saturday afternoon.
Hop to the ball of amazingness. Have a hell of a weekend, my friend. This sounds fantastic, and I could not be happier for you. Thanks for hanging out with us on the OSG on CFB.
Hey, always good to catch up with the OSG. Excited about being on and excited to tell the story of South Dakota State.
When we come back after commercial, it's Wilkie and Twitter to Anthony talking about Michigan and some other team. I think they're Notre Dame or something like that. It's Rivalries and Trophy Games on OSG Sports. We'll be back in 2 and 2.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Rock at the What's Up Falcons podcast, and I'm joined with my boys. My boys in the house. Where you at?
Yeah. What up?
Oh, gee, and we have Q, and we have Hoop in the house.
Q's here, the most beloved guy in all of sports entertainment.
Indeed. Hey, y'all, we want to thank everyone for listening to us, and if you want to listen to some great Falcons information, check us out on the What's Up Falcons podcast. Right, fellas?
Right. Sir. Hey, we here every week, baby.
We keeping it real, so check us out out there on Twitter. Holla. Peace.
Subscribe to the What's Up Falcons podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Listen to the What's Up Falcons podcast at whatsupfalcons.com.
Staying in the Midwest, Michigan and Notre Dame at the Big House, prime time. And what I keep reading is if Michigan loses this game, this is kind of the beginning of the end, or maybe the telltale sign that Michigan needs to perhaps look beyond Jim Harbaugh, and maybe this is kind of the end of the road or the Harbaugh era at Michigan. Do you see this Wolverine team coming out fired up and with a chip on their shoulder, taking on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish?
I think Michigan is going to be as fired up for this game as they will be for any game all year other than, say, Ohio State. I do think the Big House will be rocking. It's prime time. The players are going to try to respond. They tried to have a positive spin out of the Penn State win, and instead of focusing on the loss itself, they tried to focus on the comeback they had in the fourth quarter, where they came back, they made it a touchdown game, and they kept fighting hard. The offense did not give up, and all that sounds fine and dandy, but this is not a very good-looking team, John, if we're being honest. Michigan, and don't forget, this Michigan team was picked by a lot of people. Now, not me and you, because we actually know stuff, but a lot of people were picking this Michigan team to be a playoff team. Am I wrong? Remind me of that.
Yes, you're right, but we didn't.
No, we did not. But a lot of people were. A lot of people thought this team was the runaway favorite. This was the year for Jim Harbaugh, and Ohio State was finally going to take a step back. And that narrative lasted like 3 weeks, and then it went away. Now, I will say this. Michigan's only lost 2 games, and they lost to a good Wisconsin team. Not a great Wisconsin team, but a good Wisconsin team. And I think a good Penn State team. I don't think Penn State is great, but I think Penn State is a good football team. They're unbeaten right now. And Michigan lost on the road. Nothing to be ashamed of. Both their losses have came on the road, and this game's at home. The problem, though, with Michigan, their offense is still just such a guessing game. I mean, Shea Patterson has taken so much heat for the way he's played at Michigan, and I still feel like when I watch him, he's playing with one arm tied behind his back. I really do. I mean, they don't have a running game. They try to run Charbonnet, but he's not a Big Ten running back. He's not your Michigan running back that can take the offense and put it on his back. And they've gotten more into running spread tendencies. They have, but they're not doing a whole lot of misdirection or any kind of movement in their formations. Their formations are pretty basic. And I don't know if they're basic because this is the first year of Josh Gaddis calling plays, or this is the first year of this offense running this scheme, but they are not running an exotic style at all when they're in shotgun. They're just running shotgun plays and sending, one dude out on the screen and a couple dudes on slant. That's all they're doing.
If they weren't in shotgun,
gotta open it up a little more.
If they weren't in shotgun, it's almost as if the offense that Bo Schembechler ran in 1971.
Right. And I do think this. Now, I think if you went back and you watched Michigan in September, they were literally running the exact same offense just out of shotgun. And I think during their bye week a few weeks ago, they tried to add some more window dressing to it, but I still don't think they've opened up their offense. They're not running a very spread offense to me. And I think that's the problem with them. Now, defensively, they're playing in this game, and that's the thing. Defense is going to show up for Michigan. They're going to it's going to be Ian Book against this Michigan defense. That's the story of the game. Ian Book is quietly having a very good year.
Yes, he is.
I think Ian Book is really starting to impress NFL scouts, not really with his talent, but with his awareness and with just his durability and the coaching factor that Ian Book has. He's going to be a very solid backup quarterback in the NFL in the future, I think. So he is doing a good job for his future, but I like Notre Dame in this game. Notre Dame just has more weapons on offense. I mean, Tony Jones Jr. is doing a good job running the football for them. Ian Book is doing a really good job, not just throwing the ball, but protecting the ball. And Notre Dame's just very comfortable. And I think when this game becomes a dogfight, Notre Dame knows that they can pull it out in the end, and they believe that they can win this game. They never think they're out of it. And I think Michigan, when they have to come down in the end and score a touchdown, I don't know if they can. I don't know if I trust the play calling. That, to me, is the difference.
Yeah, I'm just curious, though, because we talked about Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator, and his play calling duties. Do you just kind of feel like he's constantly looking behind his back at Jim Harbaugh, when he's making these calls, and a little gun shy about opening things up and getting more exotic on offense?
I think that is probably what's going on. I would like to know how much meddling Jim Harbaugh is doing in this offense, because, I mean, John, he said it in the offseason. It was hard for him to give up this offense to Josh Gaddis and make this radical change. This is a radical change of philosophy from what Jim Harbaugh was used to. I mean, we're going from West Coast to spread, and Harbaugh didn't like it, but he felt like he had to get with the times. Well, I don't know if they've actually embraced it, which we already talked about. And you have to wonder how much of that is going on. Don't forget, they have a guy who's never called plays before calling plays for the first time. How much is Jim Harbaugh going to trust that? I think Harbaugh has probably meddled about as much as he's going to. If he was going to take it over, he probably would have taken it over in the bye week. And to his credit, right or wrong, I mean, it seems like they doubled down on the spread and they committed even more to it. Yeah. I just don't know if they committed enough. And if they lose this game and they lose the season ender to Ohio State, they're going to be looking for another offensive coordinator. I don't think Josh Gaddis will see year two. And Jim Harbaugh is going to be back, but if he's going to be back, they're going to have a new OC. It'd be interesting if this marriage does not work. Does Jim Harbaugh commit to the spread for the Michigan program, or does he decide to start over again in the future? Now, that's a long way away, and we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe Josh Gaddis gets it right this week. They go off, they beat Notre Dame, and this offense is clicking, and they finish the year strong. We'll see. But as of right now, it has not clicked.
When we come back, it's Duke and North Carolina, the football rivalry. Luke DeCock, columnist from the Raleigh News and Observer, joins the show with his take on the Battle of the Blues, as will Dave Harding, Duke football radio analyst from the Blue Devil Sports Network from Learfield IMG. So stay with us.
The online sports guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football. Now back to college football's rivalries and trophy games.
Welcome back. It's the Victory Bell on Saturday in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as Duke and North Carolina meet in their football rivalry. And joining me to talk about it is the radio analyst, the football radio analyst for Duke, the Blue Devil Sports Network from Learfield IMG. That's Dave Harding. And Dave, for somebody, obviously the basketball rivalry, the men's basketball rivalry kind of overshadows everything when it comes to Duke, North Carolina. But give our listeners a perspective of what the football rivalry is like, especially since David Cutcliffe took over as the Duke head coach.
Well, yeah, it was completely lopsided before Coach Cutcliffe took over. And then after he got there, a couple of years into his tenure in 2012, the Blue Devils picked up their first win in the series in quite some time. And since then, it's been filled with some really good games. Before that, it had some good games that, just from a Blue Devil fan's perspective, probably ended up on the wrong side of things. But the Blue Devils have since, in recent history, won 5 of the last 7, which means they've retained the victory bell during those days. And then they've got the past 3 in a row, actually, Duke has held on to. So it's kind of gone the Blue Devils' way of late, but, we've got Mac Brown in there, some new life at the UNC program, and I think this year's got a really intriguing storyline going into the game with both teams hungry for a win as they still try to stay alive in the Coastal Division race that is totally wild, and also fight for bowl eligibility.
Yeah, you mentioned about the recent success about the Blue Devils over the Tar Heels, and 3 in a row. That's the first time that's happened since the late '80s when Steve Spurrier was the head coach of Duke. So things have really trended toward the Blue Devils in this series. Now you played at Duke. You were an offensive lineman there. Did you get a chance to ring the victory bell after a game?
I did. 2012 was my redshirt junior year. We played Carolina at home, and it was one of the wildest games that I've ever been a part of. Carolina goes ahead late in the fourth quarter. I was playing left guard at the time. Sean Renfrey, Connor Vernon, and Jamison Crowder really helped orchestrate a drive moving down the field for Duke to score with seconds to go on a 4th down try to win the game. And we had to learn how to ring the bell. We hadn't seen it. We hadn't touched it. I'd heard it on the far sideline up until that point. But once we ran over and got the bell pulled over to the Duke side and started putting some Duke blue paint on it, it's interesting. The bell, in fact, will go all the way around in a complete circle if you let it. But when you do that, you can imagine the little clanger at the bottom gets stuck against one side. And so it'll maybe make one ring and then not do much else. And that's all we were doing. Come to find out, you've got to just swing it back and forth patiently. So it's not something to do, I guess, when you're overly excited. But we got a hang of it, and now it's become quite the fixture in the Yo Football Center. It's got its own little cutout place right by the locker room in the main thoroughfare there in the football center. And if you ring it, you can hear it throughout the building. It goes up the elevator shaft all the way up to the 4th floor, the coaches' offices. You can hear it in every meeting room throughout the place. And so it's definitely something that when it rings, it's a reminder of the rivalry and the work that it takes to keep it, because it's never an easy battle against North Carolina.
Yeah, what you described is really what makes college football special. You have these unique trophy games throughout the country, and obviously Duke and Carolina have theirs with the Victory Bell. How gratifying is it for a player to earn that possession of that prized possession of the Victory Bell after a game and ringing it? How gratifying is that as a player?
It is so much fun. I've got some great memories of my life, including my wedding recently, but the Victory Bell sits right up there with it. Earning it, especially for the first time in 12, was just such a fun experience. We had the fans storm the field, so we were celebrating with a bunch of other undergrads and Duke fans alike. My family was there. Just such a fun thing to be part of. And then for those trophies and rivalry games, to be able to hold on to it for that entire year is a great reminder of the success that you had. But to me, and I go back to my point in my previous comment, but a great motivating factor as well, because once you taste that sugar, once you get a hold of what it's like, you do not want to relinquish it. And I think that's what adds a little bit more of a fire to these rivalry games and the passion that you see on the field.
We're talking with Dave Harding, the football radio analyst on the Blue Devil Sports Network from IMG Learfield. And Dave, Duke comes into this game 2-2 in conference, fighting for a Coastal Division title, 3-4 overall. What is some things about this Blue Devil team that has been a success this year?
Well, I think the defense is the first thing that comes to mind. You could turn on or open up the stat sheet, if you will, against Virginia and try to say otherwise, but they were given tough field position battles all night long and ultimately gave up quite a few points, but the offense wasn't able to generate much. But you look back through the rest of the season, and the defense has been tremendously consistent. They're the fastest group from a talent standpoint on the field in the Cutcliffe era, and you can really see it. They run sideline to sideline incredibly well. Tackling has been a point of emphasis. Hasn't been great throughout the whole season as a consistent theme, but they've improved on it as of late. And I think, to me, that when you think of Duke football right now, it's easy to think of Coach Cutcliffe and his offenses, but the defense is playing at a very high level. Offensively, huge question marks about quarterback. After Daniel Jones goes to the NFL draft, top 10 pick, a lot of talk there. Who's going to fill his shoes? And it's been Quentin Harris, the redshirt senior out of Connecticut, and he's done a really good job of coming in and picking up right where they left off offensively. Some new weapons at wide receiver, younger players really getting into the mix, and the future looks really bright. Also behind an offensive line that, to me, is the most improved unit from last year to this year in the entire conference because of the quality that they're playing with. And they play with a little extra mean streak and something to prove after a struggling season last year. So a good group of players. Offensively, haven't had the consistency that they would like, holding on to the football. Too many turnovers, 11 coming in 2 games, both Virginia and Pittsburgh, 2 consequently losses. So if the Blue Devils are holding on to the football as they should, this is a really good football program.
Dave, I know you're in the middle of your deep dive preparing for the radio broadcast. What are some things that you're looking at? How do you think this game is going to play out?
Yeah, I think when I look defensively, first of all, for Carolina, they've got a little bit more of a traditional look than what the Blue Devils have struggled against Virginia and Pittsburgh. They throw all sorts of stuff at you, the Who's and the Panthers do. But Carolina, a little bit more traditional. You see more 4-down fronts. 3rd down gets a little bit dicey. They throw a lot of different looks at you, but I see a lot of talent. And so to me, it's going to come down to the Blue Devils being able to run the football against those 4-down, 3-down looks and getting success up front, which ultimately can help take the pressure off of Quentin Harris, because he has struggled at times when there is pressure on him to pass the football. Defensively, I mean, pick your poison with North Carolina. Sam Howell, as a freshman, has done a phenomenal job leading them at quarterback, and they've got numerous threats, whether that's in the running game or the passing game. The Duke defense, we've talked about how they've been a highlight this season, but they're going to be challenged mightily against a team that loves to attack you vertically and horizontally with the outside run. So a fun game to watch. Certainly, I think they're both teams that are incredibly hungry for a win, obviously, but beyond that, pretty evenly matched from a talent standpoint. So does home field advantage give North Carolina the edge they need, or do the Blue Devils, with the victory bell holding on to that, give them the edge to get the victory? Got to watch and see.
At the top, you mentioned the coaching matchup between David Cutcliffe and Mac Brown, and who knew that this would be as good as the Mike Krzyzewski Roy Williams matchup. They go twice a year. In fact, they're just as old as those two. But these are a couple old war horses that are going at it for the first time. And talk about that coaching matchup between those two.
Yeah, I was actually able to sit in on a production meeting when Mac was calling games for ESPN. He had the Duke-Miami game a couple seasons ago, and I witnessed the interaction between Coach Cutcliffe and Coach Brown, and they've got a tremendous amount of respect for one another. Obviously, having competed at the highest level of college football for such a long time, they have, and it's, people talk about college football. It seems like such a grand scale. There's so many people associated with it, but when you peel back the layers, everybody knows someone that you know, and it's really a tight-knit community. So the two of them were sharing stories about mutual friends, and I think that both of these coaches are tremendous leaders of men and do a good job of building programs. And that's what Mac Brown has been asked to do at Carolina. So to me, this rivalry game comes down to an ability to recruit well in state. It comes down to an ability to promote your program even better to those on a national scale. So these are program games, and each one of these coaches, although they have tremendous amount of respect for one another, are trying to get the better of the other one just because of what's at stake this week.
So where can we hear Duke and Carolina? Dave, promote what you guys are doing.
Yeah, take a listen. You can always find us on the TuneIn app, probably one of the easiest things for listeners that are outside of our local carriers. But there's a list on the internet that you can tune in to find our affiliates throughout, and then also on SiriusXM. So give us a listen. It's a lot of fun with David Shoemate and John Roth on the sideline. We talk about food. We'll talk about the Bell plenty and break down a lot of the day's action. It should be a great time.
Yeah, you and David and John are a good listen. I highly recommend you tune in and listen while you're watching Duke and Carolina. Dave Harding from the Blue Devil Sports Network from Learfield IMG. Many thanks for joining the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game Show.
A lot of fun and quite the topic to talk about. Always happy to be on with you, John.
And now joining the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game podcast is Luke DeCock. He is the columnist for the Raleigh News and Observer, talking about the North Carolina Duke football rivalry. And Luke, how would you describe, because this rivalry is tremendous, this football rivalry is really overshadowed by the men's basketball rivalry. How would you describe the football rivalry, especially the last 10 years since David Cutcliffe took over at Duke?
Well, it's certainly revitalized, and really since Cutcliffe took over. When you think of Duke and North Carolina in football, you really go back more to the early years of sort of Ace Parker and Choo Choo Justice and the 30s and 40s, the very early days, pre-ACC days. And there's been a few flare-ups over the years, but this has predominantly been a basketball rivalry, and even in that case, really only for the last 50 or 60 years, depending on how you want to look at it. But, the two things that really gave a jolt to this particular rivalry, one was Spurrier at Duke, taking his famous photo in front of the scoreboard at Kenan Stadium after Duke won there, gathered his whole team and took a photo in front of the scoreboard, and really just one of the big middle fingers of the history of the rivalry in any sport. So that was really if you go back to then, that was kind of the high watermark of the Duke Carolina football rivalry. But since Cutcliffe got to Duke, Duke has become obviously a Coastal Division contender and a bowl team on a perennial basis. And UNC is in sort of its MAC interregnum between MAC reigns. Was good and was bad and was kind of everywhere in between. So there was that moment there where Duke went to the ACC championship game and clinched the title at Kenan Stadium. Ringing the victory bell. That really injected a ton of life into the rivalry. And then a couple of years later, UNC wins over at Duke, gets the victory bell back, and then the tradition, it seems silly now, the tradition was the team that recaptured the victory bell would then spray paint the cart and bell, the team colors, immediately after the game. And teams would actually bring cans of spray paint, which sounds like a really bad idea, which as it turns out it was. And UNC spray painted the walls of the visiting locker room, and they spray painted Duke's practice field, and they basically spray painted everywhere you could spray paint. And we had this amusing sort of bit where UNC's athletic director had to write Duke a check for the damages, and Larry Fedora had to write Duke a personal check for the damage. And, Duke took the opportunity to recarpet the visiting locker room. So, that added a lot of life to the rivalry. Those are the kind of things that make a rivalry entertaining. But even then, even amid all of that, there's no question that this is predominantly a basketball thing. I think honestly in football, if you were to ask Carolina fans, not who would they rather beat, but who would they not want to lose to? I think they'd rather not lose to State than lose to Duke, because there's just so much more interaction with NC State fans on a daily basis. And without the tradition and history and bile of the basketball rivalry, the rivalry with State in football is probably a hair more significant in some ways. The difference being UNC and Duke is in every sport rivalry, soccer, lacrosse, baseball, whatever. It's whatever sport you're playing, it's always going to be the big game. But there is an interesting dynamic there with State. But that's sort of your pocket guide history to the recent rivalry.
Well, we talked about the men's basketball rivalry between Duke and Carolina being somewhat overshadowed the football rivalry. But, you have the old guys in men's basketball, Krzyzewski and Roy Williams. You kind of have that dynamic with the football rivalry now with Mac Brown and David Cutcliffe. And I think this is an interesting matchup between the two coaches.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, Mac being back is just an absolutely, fascinating turn of events in so many ways. And Cutcliffe having built this, I wouldn't say empire necessarily, but having built his program to what it is now, Duke now expects to beat North Carolina, and Mac will certainly expect to beat Duke. And, those to me are the conditions that always foster the best football when both teams feel that way. But Mac's deal when he was here before, and it will be again, was he wanted to win the quote-unquote state championship. He wanted to beat East Carolina. He wanted to beat Appalachian State. He wanted to beat Duke. He wanted to beat Wake. He wanted to beat State. Those were the games that mattered to him as much as the ACC games. And he made a big deal about that during his first tenure. In fact, long after Mac was gone, off to Texas, my colleague Joe Giglio actually would give out an unofficial Mac Brown Cup every year, which was, basically came up with there was no round robin, obviously. But he came up with a point system of, you get 2 points for a road win, 1 point for a home win, 1 point for a road loss, and 2 points for a home loss, and would throw everybody, Carolina, State, Duke, Carolina, Wake, App, Charlotte, into the mix, and then crown the Mac Brown Cup champion based on who had sort of fared the best against in-state opponents in that particular year. And I guess he has to rename it now that Mac is back, but. That was always a big deal for Mac, and they've already lost to Wake and App. So in that respect, it's been a bad year for North Carolina. They can get back to 500 if they can beat Duke and State, and those are probably the two. Well, I wouldn't say probably; those are unquestionably the two biggest games left on North Carolina's schedule. That's what North Carolina is going to have to do to get to a bowl game, and it's what North Carolina is going to have to do to get back to 500 in the state.
Interesting about Mac Brown, if Carolina does defeat Duke, he becomes Carolina's all-time winningest coach, with passing Dick Crum with 73 wins if they get the win. Kind of an interesting tidbit. We're talking to Luke DeCock. He's the columnist for the Raleigh News and Observer, and we're talking about the Duke-Carolina football rivalry. I want to focus in on North Carolina right now because I think when we all gathered at the ACC Football Media Day in July that we didn't think Carolina was probably maybe a best of 2-win team. And right off the bat they get the shocking win over South Carolina. And has Sam Howell been the difference as far as the leadership at quarterback? And do you see Mac Brown's influence on this team? Because that game against Clemson, I mean, they hung with the Tigers. I don't think a team the last couple of years would have been able to do that.
One, I'm going to disagree with your premise a little bit, just because I didn't think it was a 2-win team. And even before we knew how good Howell was, I said last year when Larry Fedora was fired, that the talent is here to win 6 or 7 games. They lost so many close games the last 2 years, so many one possession and overtime games that it really skewed the results and the perception of the team. Now, was that coaching in part? Absolutely. There's no question about it. But in terms of raw talent, especially in the Coastal Division, this was not a team that had a huge talent deficit that needed to be overcome. This wasn't a Georgia Tech situation where you're switching from the triple option. So I'm not surprised that this is a team that is in contention for a bowl berth. I think what's ironic is almost every game that they've played has, again, been a one-possession game. And what they've done is they've done a little better job of winning those games, which they were losing before. And that, I think, you can attribute a lot to coaching and Mac and experience and the confidence that he's given this team. There's no question that Sam Howell being able to step in and be an impact player as a freshman at the quarterback position is a huge, huge bonus. And it enabled them in part to move Chaz Surratt to linebacker, where he's been terrific. Been an impact player at linebacker. So it's had a spillover effect in a lot of ways. I do think, that what Mac has been able to do, and he talked about it from the very beginning, is we've got to give these kids a reason to believe. They've been beaten down. They don't have any confidence. They don't know how to win games. And you know what Mac is really good at, beyond the X's and O's and the nuts and bolts, is, Mac, and I don't mean this in a pejorative or derogatory way. Mac is a salesman. He can sell recruits on his vision. He can sell players on what they can do that they can't see. I wish I had a better word for it than salesman, because that carries with it some negative connotations, but I don't mean it that way. I don't mean he's a huckster. I just mean he's a person who can connect with people. He can talk to people, and he can convince them that they're capable of doing things that they didn't necessarily believe they were capable of doing. And I think the South Carolina game, UNC made a lot of mistakes in that game, but when it counted at the end, UNC was playing its best football. And Mac even screwed up at the end and admitted it with the kneel down on fourth down when he should have just run out the clock. So, and I think the Clemson game is another example of him trying to send that message to his team. They can kick the extra point and go to overtime. But he knew, and I was down on the field at that point, I knew that their defense was gassed, that they had probably no chance of winning in overtime. And I think you can quibble about the play they called on the 2-point conversion, which is a speed option that Clemson snuffed out pretty easily. You can quibble with that particular decision, and as we saw on the sideline of the Virginia Tech game, Max does not always agree with Phil Longo's play calling. But I don't quibble, and I don't think you should quibble with the decision to go for two. He's trying to teach his kids how to. I didn't get into this part of it. I just said, knowing what he knew about the defense, and you could see on the field, you had to go for the win at that point. But I think you could also make an argument in the bigger picture that he knew he had to teach his team how to win. And this was one way to show that, to say, we're going to go for the throat. And if we don't get it, we took Clemson to the last play. If we get it, we have, the biggest upset of the season. So I think there's a lot in there that he's been able to do to get the most out of that talent. And the two biggest differences from last year are they've actually won a few close games, which I think you can attribute to Mac in a large part, and Sam Howell, which is entirely attributable to Mac and his ability to flip Sam Howell when he took the job. So, to the extent that Carolina's improved in those two areas, certainly, that's where you would point to.
So as you begin your deep dive as game time approaches, and you're looking at kind of analyzing the matchup, what are some things you expect to see Saturday when these two teams butt heads on Saturday? Well,
Duke's been so up and down, and looks so good at times and so bad at times. There's an inconsistency there that surprises me. From a David Cutcliffe team, they usually don't have these issues. These are unusual issues for Cutcliffe. And Carolina has some similar issues of its own in some ways. Is really still trying to figure some of this stuff out, trying to navigate, what kind of team it is, and now some of the injuries are starting to pile up. I think Duke has the advantage in one sense in that they've got a really mobile quarterback with Quentin Harris who can throw the ball, but also can make plays at his feet. If Duke doesn't turn the ball over a bunch of times, which they have been prone to do on occasion, then that becomes an advantage for them. Duke's defense has made some good plays, but also has, given up some big plays. So, there's so little from these teams that you can look at and say, oh, yes, that's definitely going to happen. It's just been such a week-to-week operation with both teams. I do think, based on what we've seen from North Carolina so far this season, that there's no question that this probably won't be a blowout, assuming Duke doesn't turn the ball over 5 times in the first half, that this will be a close game and that it will come down to the fourth quarter, and that it will, it'll be a narrow set of circumstances.
So, Luke, this is a chance for you to kind of promote what you and the paper are doing. So I give you the floor. What are some things you're working on?
Well, I'm actually, the biggest thing I'm working on right now is actually has nothing to do with Carolina and Duke. I mean, we're almost in basketball mode already. So, the football game is what it is. I'm actually working on a project about a high school team that has adopted the Dartmouth model for practicing. And they do not hit, they do not tackle in practice, and they're having the best season in school history. So I started the story before they were 7-2. In fact, I think they lost. They were 2-0 when I started working with them, and they lost the next two games. So I can definitely say it's got nothing to do with, this was not selected based on their success, but we've just been following along all season, watching them practice, talking to some of the Dartmouth people, talking to doctors, concussion experts. And this has taken up an extraordinary amount of my time, but it's been fascinating to kind of watch this. And, the lens that we're looking at it through, which I think would be of interest to listeners of your podcast, is basically, if Larry Fiora made the argument at Media Days 2 years ago that football's under attack, and in football, we're going to lose America if we lose football and all that nonsense. But the reality is football is in a position where, as a sport, it has to be less damaging to the people who play it. We know more about the long-term damage and even short-term injuries. And Dartmouth and the Ivy League think they've figured out a way to do this where you have a lot fewer injuries and especially a lot fewer concussions. So the question is, can you do it at the high school level without virtual reality and robotic tackling dummies and a bioengineering school and all of the advantages that Dartmouth and the other Ivies have? And it's been fascinating to watch. So it really is a story that's less about a high school team and really more about the future of football and what that's going to look like.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing that. And, Luke, I appreciate your time joining us on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game podcast to discuss Duke and North Carolina.
Absolutely. It's as I said, it's almost basketball season, but not yet.
Well, up next, we go Division II, and the wagon wheel is on the line with West Texas A&M and Eastern New Mexico. John Nelson is back with the voice of West Texas A&M, Lucas Kinsey. So stick around.
The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. All you got to do, install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, lacrosse. Let's get this done. Get the OSG Sports app today.
You're listening to College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games on the OSG Podcasting Network.
Welcome back to the OSG on CFB Trophy Games and Rivalries, and it's time to discuss, Lucas, I would sit here and say that it's a Darius Rucker. I can't remember if it's a Darius Rucker tune. I think it's a Darius Rucker tune.
Yes, it is. It's the wheel with Darius Rucker. In fact, they play that song a lot this time of the year with Eastern New Mexico and West Texas A&M, John. Good to be back with you as well.
The play-by-play voice of West Texas A&M, Lucas Kinsey, hanging out with us. All right, so how has the season gone so far?
Well, it's been really good. First of all, for the Buffaloes of West Texas A&M, right now they have a 5-win, 2-loss record. A lot of people feel, and the head coach would tell you this as well, feel like it should be 6-1 instead of 5-2, John, but we can't go back. Lost a tough game last Saturday at home against Angelo State, 17-14, and the Buffs had their chances. They actually missed a couple of field goals late in the fourth quarter, ended up losing the game by 3, but they're 5-2, and so that's good. Eastern New Mexico, same record, 5 wins, 2 losses, and Eastern New Mexico is really good again this year. In fact, they've got the second leading rusher in the country in Paul Terry. So the Buffs have their hands full against Eastern, but as always, it's such a fun, heated rivalry, so I'm excited.
All right, so where is the wheel currently?
It's in Portales, John, and it's been there for a couple of years. As you look at this series, it's so close. This is the 32nd meeting since they started this thing back in 1986. But the last time the Buffs won, you got to go back to 2015. And so it has been in Portales the last 3 years. Buff Nation, as we say here in Canyon, in Canyon, Texas, they want that wheel back. But it's not going to be easy for WT. Eastern has had the Buffs number the last several years, and they just have a really interesting triple option style that WT has had a hard time figuring out.
And usually for me, when I hear triple option, for me defensively, it's dive, keep, and pitch. And those are the three options that you're having to do things defensively. So it's going to take, for me, at least from my novice perspective, just a lot of defensive discipline going up against that kind of an offense.
You're exactly right, John. When you use the word discipline, that's what Hunter Hughes would say. And, of course, our head coach for the Buffs, Hunter Hughes, he's an old defensive coordinator going back to his days at Colorado State Pueblo, where they won a championship in 2014. And so, yeah, he's going to say that defense, you have to do your assignment. Every player has someone they're supposed to take. For Eastern, I mentioned Paul Terry, the talented running back. He's already got over 1,000 yards rushing on the season. But I think, John, that the key play for Eastern New Mexico, it's a guy that, as an opposing announcer, I'm going to be glad to not see him next season. And it's Wyatt Strand. He's a senior from Logan, New Mexico. He is the, as I say, mechanical engineer of the option offense for them. It seems, he's always in the right place. He makes the right read. They don't throw the ball but maybe 5 or 6 times a game, but when he does throw it, he's very accurate. So he has 9 rushing touchdowns this season already for the Greyhounds, and you got to find a way to slow him down. It's not just the running backs.
When it comes to the wheel itself, and right now, obviously, with it being in Portales, is it a Stanley Cup situation when it is there on campus where if you're a part to the victory, you can touch it? Can everybody touch it? What's the deal with the wheel?
Yes, it is that way. In fact, if the Buffaloes are able to get this thing back, there's going to be lots of pictures and people wanting to touch that thing. Now, when you say touch it, the lifting it is a different story, John, because the thing weighs 80 pounds. So it's sturdy. It's pretty heavy. Those football players, obviously, they hoist the thing up pretty easily after a victory. But, the last 2 years we had ended up in a weird scheduling thing. We had played them in Canyon at WT's home stadium. And so they have gotten to race up the hill the last 2 years and go claim that thing. And the Buffs are going to try to do the same thing at their place this Saturday against Portales, in Portales.
Well, for me, it's Canyon versus Portales. I mean, I'm right there with you with that, too. But when it comes to Canyon, and I know that we've spent a lot of time in the Lone Star Conference this year when it comes to rivalries and such. We talked to the head coach of Western New Mexico on last week's show, as a matter of fact, with Eastern and Western going at it. And they're going through a transitional time, but we've spent a lot of time in the Lone Star Conference and gotten the vibe from everybody about what football is like in Silver City and what it means and all that kind of stuff. For someone who's never been to Canyon and has never seen things with WT, what does football mean there to fans and supporters of the Buffs?
Well, it means everything, John. Passion is a word that comes to my mind just when you think about football. Texas high school football obviously is so huge. And then you carry that on over into Saturdays. One thing that we're pretty proud of here at WT is we have a brand new stadium this year. And we've had excellent crowds at the home games so far. The crowds will obviously travel. I mean, that's something that's a luxury for me as a broadcaster is when we go on the road at WT, when we go on the road, we're going to have a lot of fans in the stands cheering for the Buffaloes, and so it makes you feel good when you go on the road and you have that support. I think that for WT, I think that this game is really important, not just for this season, John, but for trying to get that wheel back to Canyon and even up the series.
Lucas Kinsey, play-by-play voice of WT, hanging out with us here on the OSG on CFB because he's PBP, and I feel like I should just do some kind of alphabet soup for the remainder of the segment. But when it comes to the Lone Star Conference in general this season, what has it been like, obviously, with you guys and with what's going on in Portales toward the top of the ladder? What's the rest of the Lone Star been looking like this year from a competition standpoint?
Well, it's been very competitive, John. At the top right now is Tarleton. The Texans have just been blowing opponents out week in and week out, and that's what we ran into several weeks ago. But the Texans are at the top. They're ranked number 4 in the country. I think they have the type of team that can make a deep run. Last year, they were knocked out, I believe, right before the Final Four, so they made the Elite Eight. And so they've got a really good squad. But then Texas A&M Commerce is playing good football as well. And then the Buffaloes, the Eastern New Mexico Greyhounds, and then also Angelo State are all right there in that pack. At 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's why this week's game is so important in terms of trying to keep a playoff dream alive. The last couple of seasons, the Lone Star Conference has only gotten 2 teams into the playoffs, and that has disappointed some folks. Last year, they felt like Midwestern State was another team that could have made it, did not. And so I think you might see this year 3 teams make it into the playoffs. But right now, the Buffs, they can't afford to lose another game, or they might be on the outside looking in.
Now, I know that you, as a play-by-play guy, you get to the stadium several hours before airtime, and I know that there's a lot of time spent on air when it comes to prepping everybody for the WT games on a weekly basis. When it comes to tailgating, this is one of the things I forgot to ask you last year. When it comes to tailgating there, what is the tailgating experience like?
Well, at the home games, John, this year it's changed and it's incredible. That's one of the things that Coach Hughes has bragged about so much. So our new stadium is on campus. And it's about a 8 to 10,000 seat venue. And our fans, it was interesting. The first game that we had, I'm up in the booth, as you said, a couple hours before, getting ready, and I'm starting to get nervous because I'm looking out and there's not hardly any people in the stadium. And I'm like, what is happening here? This is our big opener. We're supposed to have, 8, 9, 10,000 people. Well, what happened was they had 3,000 to 4,000 people that were across the street on our campus at West Texas A&M, which is absolutely gorgeous, and they were tailgating. So you get your spot selected, and you get out there, and people just come through, and it's really like its own special entity each week with tailgating, and then they end up making their way over to the game, and so it's a lot of fun. And what they do this year is the players actually walk through where that tailgating happens. They walk through campus and they walk over to the stadium, and so that's a really neat experience for our fans as well.
All right, Lucas, time for the blatant promo. For anybody that wants to keep an eye and an ear on what's going on with WT, not just this week, but every single week with everything going on in the Lone Star, how do they do it?
Okay, so it's been different this year for us, John. But for West Texas A&M, we are on the WT Sports Network, which is online this season. So it's gobuffsgo.com, and so you go there. And on the road, obviously, we have an audio stream that fans can access. If it's home games, then they get a chance to watch us, which I've had to learn a little bit of that. I've been on camera a little bit this year, but it's been fun with the home broadcast network on gobuffsgo.com. And John, last thing I want to say, I want to just get a plug in here for my Buffaloes, playing some good football. And I think we talked about that option offense. The Buffaloes have 2 linebackers who are in the top 10 in the nation in tackles, with Hayden Dennis and Frank Honing at 6 and 7. So I think defensively, WT has a really good team this year. Need the offense to score some points, but hopefully the Buffaloes can come away with the victory and get that wagon back.
As always, my friend, thanks for coming on and tearing down the fourth wall a little bit and letting everybody see what's going on there with WT. It's always fun to catch up with you, Lucas, and have a great call and have a great game. And congrats on the new stadium and everything going on there. Sounds like a lot of fun in Canyon, not just this week, but every week.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And hopefully we can have some fun in Portales this Saturday.
All right. When we come back, it'll be more of the OSG on CFB. It's Trophy Games and Rivalries. We'll be back in 2 and 2.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
Welcome back. John Wilkerson, John Nelson joining you as we wrap up our Rivalries and Trophy Game show. And let's start with the FBS level. Boston College and Clemson will play for O'Rourke McFadden Trophy. I'm going to take a wild guess here and go with the Tigers.
Well, what's the number, I think, is the other question.
Does it matter?
No. Well, I think
the big one.
It's going to be a big one. I think Clemson covers. It's going to be a long day for the Fighting Adazios, I think.
Illinois and Purdue play for the Purdue Cannon. I like the Illini in this one.
Well, yeah, you think that they can continue their hot streak? I think that's the biggest question.
Well, as we talked about in the college football debrief, Lovie Smith's zone defense is a rock star right now, and Purdue is a wounded team right now. So let's go with the Illini. At least I'm going with the Illini.
I like your rationale, yours and Twitter, Anthony. So I'll go with that. So I will second your motion to the floor, sir.
Well, we got a good one in Conference USA. Western Kentucky and Marshall. Now, this rivalry is unofficially known as the Moonshine Throwdown. Both teams are fighting for the top of the Eastern Division of Conference USA. Western Kentucky right now 4-0 in conference. Marshall just behind them at 2-1, as is Florida Atlantic in that division. Marshall won last year's game 34-7. In fact, the Thundering Herd have won 4 of the last 5 over Western Kentucky in the Moonshine Throwdown, and this should be a fun one to watch.
So basically, what you're saying is I need to throw down on Western Kentucky here to break the streak.
I would say yes, but that's me.
Yeah. See, for me, I'm looking at Western here. That's just my gut. I have no real evidence to support my fact-based fact finding here, but I'm gonna go with Western Kentucky to cover.
All right, we've heard from one FCS trophy game, the Dakota Marker, as number 1 North Dakota State and number 3 South Dakota State battle for the Dakota Marker with College Game Day there, and we chronicled that at the lead of the show. There's another pretty good FCS matchup going on out west. As number 11 Montana takes on Eastern Washington. The Eagles are having a little bit of a tough year at 3-4 this year. They're the defending FCS runner-up. And Montana, this is their first home game in quite a while. They play for the Governor's Cup. Probably go with the Grizzlies in this one.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Grizz too, just because of how rough the season's been heading the other way. And it's always tough after you make a dash to the championship, especially when you have a lot of senior leadership and trying to fill that with youth that didn't necessarily get the reps that they got the year before when you were chasing a title. So we'll go with the Grizz here.
Also in the FCS, the Magic City Classic between Alabama A&M and Alabama State. And that's always an entertaining ball game.
I vote for halftime.
And you should. Division II, a good rivalry in the Sunshine State between West Florida, which is 20th ranked in Division II, and Florida Tech. They play for the Coastal Classic Trophy.
At least it isn't like the Coastal Classic Cup or something like that. But what we've seen from UWF over the last couple of years since they've built the program from scratch, you have a team in the Gulf South Conference that has really done well. I mean, that's where I'm going here. I think the Argos are going to do. I think they're going to take home the trophy here. Caleb Nobles is a part of the offensive coordinating staff, and with his time in Division II at Valdosta State, knowing how high-powered an offense was that he had in high school and in college, and now he's able to take that knowledge and take it to the offensive side of things for UWF. I'm going to go with the fighting Caleb Nobles and the Argos in that.
We talked about the wagon wheel earlier between West Texas A&M and Eastern New Mexico. In Division III, it's the Conestoga Wagon. They're playing for a covered wagon between Dickinson and Franklin and Marshall. And, of course, this is one of the unique prizes in small college football because it is a hand-carved covered
Conestoga wagon, brother. You can't go wrong.
Encased in glass. It's a miniature replica of the wagon, and this is a prized possession for both schools.
And I'm going to go with since Franklin and Marshall are creating a 2-on-1 opportunity here, I'm going to go with F&M to take home the Conestoga wagon.
All right, I'll concur. We'll go with Franklin and Marshall, or we'll go with the acronym F&M to take home the wagon. So really a good mix of rivalries this week. Obviously, the all eyes will be in Brookings, South Dakota for it should be for the Dakota Marker, which is one of those unique rivalries, and it just happens to be 1 versus 3 in FCS.
And catching up with Tyler Merriam, at least on my side of things, when we were talking about that as our lead story this week, you could tell that having game day and all of the pageantry and the ball of awesomeness that is going on in Brookings with this harmonic convergence of 1 versus 3 and Dakota Marker and college game day and all this kind of stuff. Personally, I would like to thank all of the FBS schools that lost or created situations where teams that you would have thought about maybe going that completely and totally just blew themselves up, and we get to see Brookings, South Dakota for college game day, as it should be. Can't wait to see it. And Tyler laid out, for those that are just listening to us here and didn't get the chance to listen in the lead, he laid out the entire scenario for where the set's going to be and what the whole situation is going to look like. And so it's looking like five numbers to the left of the decimal place, hanging out on campus, sold out crowd, Dakota Marker on the line, 1 versus 3. That's where game day should be, and that's what this show is about. To be able to expose matchups like this. And frankly, I'm going to go with the home team in this one just because of all the pomp and the circumstance and the harmonic convergence of everything that's going on. I'm going to go with the Jacks here.
And it was great to catch up with Jeff Culhane, the voice of the North Dakota State Bison. He shared the similar thoughts. And, of course, I'm going to have to go with the Jackrabbits as well because last week the Bison shut out my alma mater, Missouri State Bears.
So you've got like next level picking going on here. Okay.
Yes. So I'm hopping with the Rabbits in this one.
I honestly thought that because you talked to Culhane and I talked to Tyler Merriam that you were going to go one way and I was going to go the other. But we've seen what it means to Fargo when college game day goes there, and how it went from 4,000 to 5,000 people to just basically taking over the entire downtown area in Fargo.
Yep.
But I cannot wait for the visuals out of Brookings. I really can't. It's going to be a fun Saturday morning for a lot of folks.
And it was great to catch up with Dave Harding, the football radio analyst for the Duke Blue Devils, and Luke DeCock, the columnist for the Raleigh News and Observer, as we learn more about the Duke North Carolina rivalry, and the fact that the Carolina, they feel more NC State is their big football rival than Duke. And the fact that we have two old guys going up against each other. And we're not talking about Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams. We're talking about Mac Brown and David Cutcliffe. I think that, to me, is the interesting dynamic in this year's Carolina-Duke game.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun to see these two guys kicking it old school, I guess is probably the best way that I can phrase it. I'm going to go with Coach Cut in this one. I just think that North Carolina's had you got the new coach bounce at the beginning of the year, and now you're kind of figuring out who you are and what you need to work on for future classes. So I'm going to go with Duke here and get the win over North Carolina.
And we thank you for joining us on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game Show. For the entire gang, for John Nelson, Anthony Goldman, I'm John Wilkerson. So long, everyone, and enjoy the games this weekend.
You can find this and past shows by downloading the OSG Sports app on your mobile device. Enjoy all of our shows from the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. The OSG Sports app is up and running. Download it today.